today we have heard in the gospel, the parable of the mustard seed and the yeast. And we can understand that Jesus offered this parable to help the disciples understand how the kingdom was going to grow. Because when you come to think about it, we're already in the 13th chapter of Luke, and maybe the disciples, they had different expectations for the kingdom. Maybe they were expecting that Jesus, he was going to attract more important people. Maybe the disciples thought that it was time for the priests and the scribes and the Pharisees to convert and follow Jesus, but nothing of that was happening. So I think that Jesus offered this parable so that the disciples could understand that the kingdom would grow in the future in a way that they didn't expect. And this parable makes me think a lot about PES, the religious order that I belong to, because this parable speaks about how things that God they start small and they start insignificant, but they can turn into something important, I guess, if people are faithful in the way. So I don't know if you knew this, but when PES started, our founder was over 80 years old. He was an old man. And normally, older people tend to be more conservative and less willing to start new things. And when PES started, Father Menor was in his 80s, and he met two young guys who weren't priests. They were not even seminarians. They were not especially influential, they had their qualities, but I remember many times hearing about how they started, and people laughed of them. Like, people laughed of Father Menor, and people were very skeptical about a religious community where the founder was 80 years old. They knew nothing about PES. And this reminds me, again, it's like the parable of the mustard seed. A lot of the things of God start very small. And they start with insignificant people in charge. But this parable reminds us that for God, small and big is different than for us what is small and big. And for God is different than for us what is effective and what is ineffective. And I think that this can also be a beautiful reminder for us, brothers and sisters, of how small things in our life can bring big changes. This is a powerful reminder of how small changes in our life can have great impact. For example, I've shared this before, but many people struggle and they say, I have a hard time doing my examination of conscience in the night, and I would really like to do my examination of conscience. What's my advice? Start small, like a mustard seed. Start with a couple of minutes, 2 or 3 minutes of examination of conscience. When I look at my own life, when I first met with my spiritual director, he told me, start with 5 minutes of prayer. 5 minutes. That sounds like insignificant, like the mustard seed. And guess what? I started growing, and I started growing, and I started growing, and I wanted more and more and more. So I really believe that this gospel is a beautiful reminder of how what we think many times is small and we despise the small things, God is telling us, you should revisit what you think is small, and you should revisit what you think is ineffective, because many times what seems irrelevant, like Father Menor in his 80s, when God is, in the midst of it, you can really find impressive surprises. And I think this is also true for our lives, because small changes in our lives can have impressive surprises in the long run.